Okay, I will call the hearing to order. This is something a little different, so bear with us, please. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. I'll introduce the members of the panel. To my left is Ms. Lynn Nesbitt. Remotely is Mr. Mark Boreski. My name is Stu McPherson. I'll be chairing the hearing. The secretary for today's hearing is Ms. Cara Belshaw, and representing the City of Winnipeg Assessment Taxation Department is Mr. Amir. We'll be hearing applications for the revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application. We'll limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony. Anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Please be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council. It's independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note the Board's decisions with respect to an application to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I'll confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We'll then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions the applicant may have, then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they so wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave and the process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard and the Board will deliberate in private to make its decisions. You'll receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. Just as information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. Also, as directed by Manitoba Health, we're requesting people avoid close contact, that being within 2 meters, with anyone showing symptoms of a respiratory illness, such as coughing or sneezing. And if you're experiencing flu-like symptoms, we're requesting you excuse yourself from the room. Thank you. So I will have you swear in the applicant, please.
Yes, I'll be affirming today, so I'll do the assessment first.
Yes.
Please state your name.
Nick Frolic.
Do you affirm the evidence you'll present today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
We actually looked at it.
And for the applicant, please state your name.
Rod Slaughter.
And do you affirm the evidence you'll present today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Afternoon, Mr. Slaughter. You're representing the owners of 4 premises today. I believe there's 4 left on the docket, and it's the amount of the assessed value that we're dealing with today.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Assessor, I think we'll deal with them as they're listed on the docket. Do you have a listing of the docket?
Yes, I do.
So the first one we'll deal with then is 1309 Mountain Avenue.
Okay.
Mr. Slaughter, that would be file number 5282.
Yes.
The one we'll begin with then. So when you're ready, Mr. Assessor, we'll hear from you, please.
Yep. For the roll year, we have 2020. Address is 1309 Mountain Avenue. Business ID number is 19802. We have a total ARV of 176,760, utilizing 25,000 square feet of area, and overall rent with occupancy cost is $7.07. Using the rent that we're using for this property is $4.92, using 25,000 square feet for the area. As you can see on the brief, you've got the heat, electrical, water, and air conditioning, where total occupancy cost is $53,770, where we come up with a ARV, or annual rental value, of $176,760. What I've done for my rent comparables to support our position is I've taken a series of rents that are all in the northwest quadrant of the city of Winnipeg. They range in sizes between 23,000 up to 47,000 square feet. And we got a range of rents from $5.50 to $8.50, which is why the department would like to confirm the assessed value for this property. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Assessor.
Actually, on the next page, as a follow-up, as we're sort of navigating through this, I got a picture there of counterclockwise of where the property is located at. And I got showing the income and expense mailer that they have here. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the assessor, Mr. Slaughter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We didn't submit any evidence. We needed further instruction from the client on this, which I've now received, and he would like us to continue. So I don't mean to take up too much of the board's time, but I would like to ask a couple questions of the assessor. And the intent is that if the board were to confirm the assessment, the owner would like us to appeal further. So my question to the assessor is, Mr. Froelich, you included the income and expense mailer.
Yes.
The very last page shows the 3 units that constitute this property as a whole, which is considered 1309 Mountain. But the unit in question for the business assessment is only one portion of the total property. And that is the middle warehouse, which we see on that last page designated as the owner occupied warehouse. Is that correct?
The last page, okay. So,
Of the, last page of your evidence, which I think is the income and expense mailer's rent roll.
okay. So I've never been in this property, so I just did a quick overview.
Yeah, that's fine.
So I'm just looking at my stuff here. So it's the middle section, okay. So, and your question is again with regards to?
That the business assessment we're discussing today is Freed and Freed International, which is the very first rent roll entry that's shown on your last page of your evidence.
That's correct.
Okay, so it's only pertaining to that one portion.
That is correct.
And to your knowledge, the second entry is an office, 100% office finish?
I never inspected this building, but when I was going through my research for this and I did the rental rate, they had reported a rent of $14.69 for the office portion.
Right, which is a semi-gross rent, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the third is, to your understanding then, the remainder of the warehouse, which is equivalent in size, and that again is a semi-gross rent, correct?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've done the math on that rent, but it would equate to $6.33 a square foot semi-gross, which includes all utilities, correct?
It just includes what they've listed here. They've just included hydro, sewer, and I guess heat, I guess.
Correct, yeah. And so if we deducted what the assessment department typically applies for those utilities, which is approximately $2.10 a square foot, would you agree that the net rent from the $633 semi-gross rent would equate to somewhere around $4.23 a square foot?
Where did you get the $2.10 from?
That would be the rates that are applied for the business assessment, which are, I think on your first page, you show the rates that the assessment department applies, which we don't disagree with. 60 cents for heat, $1.26 for electricity, 25 cents for water.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so what we're looking at there is, that's what we have right now there, because I don't believe if this is warehouse space, is this air conditioned?
No.
So automatically we take off, for the air conditioning, we would take off 35 cents there, right?
Right, yeah, I didn't add that in. So it would just be the heat at 60, electricity at $1.26, and water at 25.
And it takes a variety of information. So I'm not familiar with this building, but overall, looking at like market comparables, I think the rent that we're using is quite fair.
Okay, but just to answer my question, that would be the math. Would you agree with that math if we took the semi-gross rent and minused what the owner is paying for based on the rates applied by the city? It would equate to $4.23 a square foot.
Well, it would be $4.43.
Or 23, I believe, is it not?
Okay. Well, like I said, this lease is in 2017. We're looking at a range of comparables. This is what our model generated. I got comparable rents to support it. I feel comfortable like that. If we look at the other rent, then if we're looking at shortfalls, So then if we're looking at the middle property, if that's a $14.69 rent, and if we're only taking $2.50 off of that, so we're saying here that the net rent for that property would be $12.10.
Yeah, that's an office space though, just to be clear.
I understand, but I'm just doing comparables and comparables here.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Borowski, questions for the assessor?
As evidence, I've got the one single sheet. What is the additional evidence that you're referring to?
There was,
I believe there's a 4-page brief, Mr. Borowski. Did you only get the front page?
if you scroll down the PDF maybe.
Oh, I'm sorry. It says page 1 of 1. So
But there's second page.
my apologies. My apologies. Okay, I've got it. No, I did not have any questions.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt.
And I have no questions.
And I have nothing, thank you. Mr. Slaughter, you don't have a formal brief, but is there a presentation you'd like to make verbally?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just verbally, again, I apologize. We didn't have complete instruction. I needed to confirm a couple things with the owner. It was what I just mentioned in the questioning. In our opinion, the best example of market rent would be the rent attained for the immediately adjacent and very similar warehouse unit, not the office unit, but the warehouse. The subject property is warehouse. The warehouse is basically divided into two halves. One is leased to the tenant mentioned. The other is owner occupied. I went through the mathematics of, and having confirmed with the owner, in fact, that they pay the utilities. The math on that semi-gross rent would equate to $4.22 a square foot. My submission verbally is that the board consider that as the best evidence for the owner-occupied subject premise. And when we add in the utility charges that we don't contest from the city, our value, if I may pause, Mr. Chairman, I can just do the math on our value, if you don't mind. Apologize, one moment. If we applied $425 a foot, slightly higher, $425 a foot to the 25,000 square feet, and we added the utility charges as applied by the city, our revised annual rental value would be reduced to $160,020, 160,020. And again, that's applying what we feel is the best market evidence, the adjacent units, arm's length lease with the prescribed utilities. And that's all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Froelich, questions for the applicant?
Mr. Slaughter, is this a model generated rent that the assessment department uses?
Currently, or what I'm proposing?
Currently.
Currently is I believe, a model generated rent. I shouldn't answer 100%.
And so if the actuals were higher than the model generated rent, what rent would you use?
I think I've been fairly transparent, Mr. Froelich, in keeping my arguments consistent. So if we had a higher rent and I still felt there was a case for whatever reason, I would probably, unless I had reason to otherwise not use that rent as market, I would likely use the higher rent.
And is that is that common usually at these hearings that we attend?
Not really, because if the actual rent was higher, that's the primary driver of the overall assessment. We probably wouldn't have recommended an appeal. But I think you'll find, and you may find an example today, where if I find an error, I will try and be fair. If we still continued the appeal, but the actual rent was higher, and we felt the actual rent was arm's length at market and fairly recent.
No other questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Borowski, questions for the applicant?
So are you unaware of the actual rent?
For the subject premise?
Yeah.
It's owner occupied space.
Oh, I thought that you said a portion was leased and a portion was owner occupied.
Yes, yeah. So the property as a whole, for realty assessment purposes, it's kind of an L shape. And there's an office at the front, which is leased to a arm's length party. That's the higher rent that Mr. Froelich had mentioned. There's a middle warehouse that the owner has retained for themselves, which is the premise that we're discussing today.
And that's what, okay, got it.
Yeah. And then there's the sister half of the warehouse, which is the one that the net rent I equate is $4.22.
Okay, sorry, I wasn't clear on that.
No, thank you.
That's my only question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Nesbitt?
I have no questions.
I have a question. We're discussing this 633 as a semi-gross rent. Is that right?
Correct.
Oh, sorry. I apologize. At the beginning of the hearing, I need to say, please put your cell phones on silent. $6.33 you mentioned was a semi-gross rent, and then you
That's
210, which is something that the city applies on based on their model, I guess. So that's where you come up with a net rent. What makes it semi-gross versus gross then?
well, the owner, if you take a look at the third page or the fourth page, sorry, of the assessor's evidence, that's the income and expense mailer. I'm not sure if the other panel members have that. If not, I can refer to it again.
No, we do have that.
Okay, so the very last page is the actual income and expense mailer completed by the owner, and he mentions correctly that the rent paid for that sister warehouse unit, you'll see on the form, is, well, I can't quite read what the monthly amount is, but the math equates to $6.33. And if you follow along to the right, the owner is asked to check the boxes, whether it be net or gross or semi-gross. And to answer your question, Mr. Chairman, if it was a fully gross rent, one would expect that every one of the boxes other than net would have been checked. What that implies is, if the owner is filling this out properly, is that all of those checked items are the owner's responsibility to pay. And when we're determining the net rent, which is required for both realty assessment purposes on a capitalized value and annual rental value purposes, we need to figure out the net rent. We need to deduct whatever it is that the owners pay. So in this case, you'll see only 3 items checked, and it basically are the utilities, water, heat, and hydro. And so what we've done is refer back to what the city applies for those items. And we've checked this in the past, and typically the city is pretty bang on with what the utility charges are. It would be $2.10 a square foot. We deduct that from 633 to come down to a net rent. And what this whole equation provides us, Mr. Chairman, is the net rent that the market has determined for the sister warehouse. And I needed to confirm that with the owner, which I now have. And in my opinion, that's the best evidence, not the rents attained for newer, smaller, superior warehouses. This is indicative of what the subject property is, which is a low ceiling height, aged warehouse with a low land to building ratio.
Okay, and that's the Bee-Made honey that we're talking,
That is correct.
and that lease was signed in 2017.
That is correct. I don't have it in evidence, so I can't talk about the previous leases, but I can say that there's a reason why the board applied $3.80 last cycle, based on the leases previously had. And that is the owner's concern, is that the rent and therefore the assessment have gone from $3.80 up to $4.92. I mean, that just doesn't seem appropriate in a 2-year span for this type of property.
Thank you. Desire for a summation, Mr. Froelich?
No need for summation.
Mr. Slaughter?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. We'll conclude that particular property. We'll move on to the next one on the docket, which is 100 Milner. File number 5694. Okay, do we all have that in our possession then?
Sure.
Got it, and all pages.
Whenever you're ready, Mr. Assessor.
Yeah, I need to counterclockwise on my
Okay.
PDF. File number is 195694 for 2020. Business ID number is 22950. Owners are Inkster Maintenance Limited. You have a total ARV value of 326,160, a total area of 35,883, and an overall ARV per square foot of $9.09. So what we have here for the model rent that we're using is we have a base ARV of $254.63, using a base ARV rent of $6.98, 60 cents for heat, $1.26 for electricity, 25 cents for water, to come up with a total occupancy cost of $75,713, and comes up with our total ARV value of $326,160. I got an older lease that I was able to find, which is a part of this complex here. And so when I brought up the subject property, let me just navigate here to see if I've included it in, that's the Reimer lease. And so what I've done here is I'm going to get back to the subject property lease in a sec, but I just want to give you an overview of our position here. So what we have here is, I'm going to just go back and then I'm going to go back to the subject property in a sec. So what we have here is, if we're looking at the property on page 2, which is the overview map. So we've got different sections here. So the property is located in the Inkster Industrial Park. It's a part of the Reimer complex. So if you look here, there's 3 different aspects of the building here, right? So number 1 is Reimer Express. So if you look at on the northeast corner, that's part of number 1. Number 1 is also part where the main trucking complex is. Number 2 building is Inkster Maintenance, is what we're looking at an appeal. And number 3 is Agri-Foods. So right now, this is under one main lease arrangement, as it states right now, under the 2017 income and expense mailer. But in the past, these areas have been separated. In these buildings are smaller square footages, and they can be leased out individually. So as I look at number 3, as I look at the Agri-Foods, and I did some follow-up work on this, if I'm looking at page 3 now of my brief. So this is like the overhead shot of 100 Milner Street, which is the one that's under appeal, which is number 2 on my overhead map. And then subsequently, we have this Agri-Food 9,400 square foot building here, which is leased at $8.29. And the square foot area for that is 9,400 square feet. Okay, so as the challenge that we have here as we go through this is looking at my overview. Sorry. Clockwise. So what we're looking at is we see the lease arrangements here taking place. This is the 2017 income and expense mailer. If I do believe correctly, the actual rent for this is $6.33 for actuals. Is that right, Rob?
I think 653. Yeah, but
Okay.
basically, yeah.
I would have to look at the brief here. I didn't write it here on the thing. So for this aspect of this building, and so this is the entire complex. And when I followed up with the person who fills out the income and expense mailers, in the past, there are subleases that are taking place. I am assuming, and Rod may or may not know this, is the Inkster Mechanic a part of the Reimer, or is that individually, or is that a different company altogether?
Sorry, Mr. Froelich, what was that?
Inkster Mechanic, the VA client that you're representing today, are they a part of Reimers, or are they a different organization altogether?
This subject premise is part of the overall tenant, Reimer Express, from my understanding.
Okay. Thank you. So now that we're looking on the next page here, I'm looking at a 2015 income and expense mailer, which shows us where the Agri-Food Central is that's at least where that works out to 6,500 monthly at 9,400 square feet, which is a triple net lease, which is individually. So if you,
Sorry, what page are you on?
I am, so I had the 2017 mailer for 1,400 Inkster, right? And then if you go page down, I'm looking at the 2015 income and expense mailer. That shows the Reimer lease, and then it also shows the lease for Agri-Food Central. So when we're looking at this here, I had mentioned our subject property lease of $8.29. That is what the Agri-Food Central Limited is. So it's 9,400 square feet. It's a smaller area, but it's $8.29. So looking at that information here, and then I subsequently showed another lease here on the Reimer Express that it showed what the lease was in 2009. So getting back to my first page here. So what we did here is, so I just took some comparables of other areas within the whole complex per se. I used the same comparables that I used last time, just to get, because the premise area for this is 35,000 square feet. The leasable areas that I've taken here are all within that sort of range, similar range. And we got rents from $5.50 to $8.50 to $8.50, which is why I'm comfortable with the value that we're having here. So I'm asking for the value to be confirmed. Also pending is that there is municipal boards that are taking place for this in 2018 and 2020, I think. Let me double check here as I navigate. No, just there's a 2020 outstanding municipal reward appeal for the subject property on the entire complex. Thank you, and that concludes my formal presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Slaughter, questions for the assessor?
Thank you. Mr. Froelich, you mentioned the municipal board appeal. Just to confirm, that's an appeal by the owner, is that correct?
That is, yeah.
Yeah, of a decision that was reduced by the Board of Revision, but not to the value proposed by the owner's agent.
No, but it was actually higher than the 2018 value.
Okay, thank you. So, sorry?
So no, I'm just saying that the cut in 2020 was below the 2018 value by almost $1 million.
Okay. Do we know if the 18 is under appeal at the municipal board?
No, you didn't appeal the 2018 municipal board.
Okay. So just to confirm, the subject premise is it's a portion of, it's about 1/4 of the entire leased property leased by Reimer Express. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you know why the city would separate this portion of the lease space out, and why it was separately assessed for business assessment purposes, portions of an entire occupied premise?
Well, I guess at some point the owner they were listed as two separate companies, and we were asked to separate them because we're not going to do anything out of without receiving any direction from the property owner that I know of. I don't know the history of this business assessment ID number, but my speculation is that we were probably asked to separate it by the business owner, and we subsequently did.
And I can't answer that. I don't have the information about that, but it strikes me as odd. Would you agree that typically a premise occupied by a business is assessed as such and not divided into multiple smaller portions?
Well, but if we get direction from the business owner to switch things up, maybe for accounting purposes, the business asked the assessment department to separate this area or this building.
Yeah, and I don't know if they did. I can't imagine they would have, but I don't doubt you. I don't have an answer myself. But I guess let's stick with this idea that typically a premise is assessed by the city as a whole of the area occupied by the business owner. If that were the case, Mr. Froelich, would you mention the actual rent paid for this entire premise is $6.53 a square foot? If this was assessed as an entire premise, would you believe that the city or you yourself would use that actual rent as a basis of the annual rental value?
Yeah, but when I look at a complex like this could be individually leased out by a different organization, and it could be separated as a separate bill number at some point. So when I'm looking at this, I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that. Like I said, I can't comment on the history of that, and I understand your point of view, but looking at the subject property and looking at other comparable property at 100 Milner with $8.29 rent for 9,400 square feet, which is 25% less, I don't think our market rent's unreasonable.
So basically your argument is that, you know, the actual rent is interesting, but because this is a portion of the total space, it should attain or be applied a higher per square foot market rent for the reasons of economies of scale.
It is a slightly higher rent, and I don't know the history of that, so I can't comment on that. I'm just looking at the information that I have presented me here. I have market rent comparables that are showing that our market rents are within range, and that's the position of our department.
Yeah. Would you not agree, though, that the business assessment fundamentally, by the language of the legislation, should be determined in such a way that is fair and just to other owners or occupiers?
Well, I believe our market rent is fair and just for this.
Okay. And if the premise was assessed, as I suggest, unless there is a direction from the owner that I'm not aware of, as one whole unit, as any other business assessment would be, the rent applied, you're saying, would be lower than what you're suggesting today because of economies of scale. It may even be the actual rent in place.
Well, what's interesting about this, and I can't comment, it's just when we fill out the income and expense mailers, you know, they fill it out as, you know, Reimer, right? Mm-hmm. And then the business owners are TRW, I guess, for how they listed as the ownership group. So, you know, this is what we've done here, and this is our market rent, and this is the value that I'm supporting.
Okay. Just then, lastly, so I guess really then we've kind of moved away from the actual rent in place for the reasons that you mentioned, which I suggest is maybe not in keeping with the typical process for assessing business assessment premises. And we've looked at the comparisons that you have on your page 1 of your brief. These range from $5.50 to $8.50 a square foot. Correct? The first 3 are the ones that stand higher than the remainder. And I because we don't have the chance to rebut in a business assessment appeal, I can only go by what I believe to be the fact from my own experience. And based on what I believe to be true, would you agree that 71 Bannister, for example, is a relatively new building? I think it was constructed in the 2000s.
That could be true. That could be correct. Yes.
Typically, a newer building likely should command a higher market rent, or a higher rent than an older building. The subject property being 1964.
Yep, and that's why we're using $6.98.
Okay, I just want to be clear though that there can be some fairly significant differences in some of these comparisons, which may skew that average. Would you agree with that?
Well, if you look at the midpoint for it, you know, the market rent that we're using is that we're 50 cents off between what you're looking for and with the market rent that we used. And, you know, we have 550, you know, I'm being consistent with regards to the areas that we're using. So if we look at the bottom 3 at 550, 575, and 625, and we're looking at the top 3 at, you know, 825, 750, and 850, and the mountain property $6.80, and we're slightly higher than that. So I think we're within the range of acceptability.
Okay. I'll end the questioning there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Boreski, questions for the assessment?
Just so I'm clear, this property is leased from Reimer Express, is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
And is
by Reimer Express. It's leased by Reimer Express, correct, Mr. Froelich?
Yep.
Yeah.
So Inkster Maintenance Limited does not have a lease from Reimer Express. Is that correct?
That is correct, because when I did my follow-up work with the contact on the income and expense mailer, they had nothing on file with regards to Inkster Maintenance Limited. And they don't report anything on the mailer, so they report everything as one. And what's interesting though is that even though on the mailer that I've provided here, Agri-Foods is still listed as a tenant, and they're still paying that $8.29 rent that's listed that I've provided here, but they didn't include it in the income expense mailer. So I can't control the owners do. All I can control is the access to the information that I have here.
Agri-Foods has a lease from Reimer. Is that what you're saying?
They have a lease with Reimer, yes.
Okay. And is Reimer leasing that land from somebody, or are they the owner of that land in fee simple?
The land or for the property number 3?
No. Agri-Foods is leasing, has a lease from Reimer.
Or
yes, no?
Well, according to 2017 income and expense mailer, there's no lease in place.
No lease. Okay, so there are some occupiers of Reimer's property. Other companies are occupying Reimer's property without a lease. Is that the situation?
They haven't. So if you look at the 2017 income and expense mailer, there's only one lease in place with Reimer in total. However, Agri-Foods is located on, on the subject property right now as we speak.
Does Reimer own that whole property in fee simple?
Reimer's leasing the property.
So that anybody that has a lease with Reimer has a sublease from Reimer. Is that correct?
Well, I'm speculating on that because when I spoke with the lady in Kansas, she had told me that the lease for building number 3 is still in place at this time.
And does Agri-Foods also get assessed for business tax purposes?
It's never been appealed, and I would have to double check. Give me 1 sec here.
I asked because I find the relationship kind of confusing, and I'd like to be clear on it. And yesterday, sorry?
No, I was just, please continue, Mr. Borowski.
Okay. Yesterday, the assessor informed the Board of Revision that subtenants are not assessed for business tax purposes.
Well, interesting enough, so Agri-Food Central Limited has an ARV in $79,440, and so they're not a subtenant; they're an actual tenant that's located on this complex.
Okay. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt.
I was also trying to sort out the relationships. So it seems to me that the property is owned.
Excuse me. Do you mind? Sorry, Mr. Chairman, can you give me 1 minute? I'm in my basement. I smell rain and I know my door is open. I've got to go close it. That's a problem with zooming in.
We will take a 5-minute break. We're at the point where Ms. Nesbitt was questioning the assessor.
Right. So I'm also trying to figure out the relationships. The owner is Inkster Maintenance Limited, according to page 1 of your brief.
Well, the owner for the realty is RPW Manitoba Limited for the entire complex.
RPW.
Manitoba Limited.
Okay.
So that's the owner of the entire complex. The occupier of the space on that complex is Inkster Maintenance Limited.
Inkster Maintenance is the occupier owned by RPW, and then we have within that a portion used by Reimer Express, a portion used by Agri-Foods, and a portion used by Inkster Maintenance.
That is perfectly correct.
Okay. Okay. And we're just looking at the one piece that's leased by Reimer Express.
No, we're just looking at the Inkster Maintenance Limited.
We're looking at Inkster Maintenance Limited,
Yes.
which is number 2
Which is number 2 on my list, yeah.
on your list.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, it's hard to navigate through these online. And we have a lease for that of $653, an actual lease.
That's for the 653s for the entire.
For the entire piece or for the Inkster piece?
See, I'm assuming that the 653s combined for the Reimer and the Inkster maintenance, because the Inkster maintenance, as Mr. Slaughter has stated, is directly limited. They're associated with, so they do the maintenance, I'm assuming, for Reimer Express Enterprise. And so based on that information, and if you look at the mailer, that's what one aspect, that's one story to be told. The other story to be told, where I did my due diligence, is there's also, that's not listed on the 2017 income expense mailer, that Agri-Food Central has a lease in place.
But you have a different assessment on them separately. You have a separate ARV.
Oh, yeah, oh, for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that
Like
there's
they're-
4 different BAs here for this property. And so the actual that's been presented doesn't tell the complete story what's happening for the entire complex for the realty.
But we don't have that from you either, right? Like we don't
Well-
have that. We don't have that information at all.
Well, we're only good as the income and expense mailers that are provided. And so that's why I showed the what was provided to us in 2015. So there's a contradiction in the mailer that was sent to us by the owner. The owner says it's just under one complex, or what we received on the mailer in 2017 contradicts what's been stated in 2015.
Okay, thank you.
I thought I was following it until you said there were 4 different BAs for this.
Yeah,
What are the 4? I see Reimer Express, Agri-Foods, and Inkster Maintenance. What's the 4th one?
and then there's Reimer's Express Enterprise Limited and Reimer Express Lines Limited.
So there are 4 different premises.
There's 4 different business assessments values for this. So
You just don't show number 4 on your map?
no, because I don't know. Well, I got 3 because that's what I was able to deduct. So if I'm looking at the square footages here, the Reimer Express Enterprise Limited is 14,000 square feet.
Yep.
And then the next one we're looking at, the Reimer Express Lines Limited, is 69,247.
Right.
So, like, to ask Rod's question, why do they have 2 Reimers and why do they have separate BA numbers? I don't understand that. And then the other one, which is Rod stating that, why, so we would have acted as rogue assessment providers of municipal assessment without getting direction. So if Inkster Maintenance is limited
we
to.
we don't know for certain. You're speculating, and Mr. Slaughter doesn't know either. So
Yeah, okay.
that's really, thank you, but that's really not helping us in this
Yeah,
situation.
no problem.
So Inkster Maintenance Limited, are they affiliated with Reimer in any way?
According to Mr. Slaughter, they are.
Well, Mr. Froelich, I don't know. I mean, that's my understanding, and I'll walk through my evidence of why I believe that. In the end, I think it's a moot point. I think it comes down to, as you say, a market rent question, but let's try and figure this out, and I'll go through my evidence as well.
Right, and RPW is the realty owner?
Realty owner.
And is RPW, is the R stand for Reimer, as far as you know, or you didn't look into that?
I didn't look into that.
Okay. Okay, I don't have anything further, thank you. So, Mr. Slaughter, let's hear from
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, could I have another question?
Certainly.
going back to this point about the leases and subleases, et cetera, is it your understanding, Mr. Froelich, that if there is a sublease, although there may be a premise, the city does not actually apply business assessment to that premise?
It's my understanding that is the case, but that doesn't seem to be the case in this circumstances.
And why would it be the case? Because, unless you can correct me, I believe the definition of premise in the legislation doesn't say that there has to be the presence of a lease, just has to be the presence of a business.
That's the legality of that. What I'm looking at here is like when we would have done this, when we would have added agri-food central to the role at one point, there was a request for us to add them for business assessment purposes. So if we're only looking at the 2017 mailer, we could assume that there's a sublease in place. However, with further digging and the research that I did do in 2015 and with the call that I made last week, you know, it's not a sublease.
Okay, so there are actually 4 companies operating business on that property. There's the true owner, and then there's Reimer, but there's 2 Reimers. Is that what you're saying? There's 2 Reimers?
2 Reimers.
And there's Agri-Food, and there is Inkster Maintenance. And are all of them equitably assessed for business assessment purposes?
I didn't look at the rents for the other ones. Yeah, I will just bear with me here for 1 sec.
I would just be curious if some of them are not, you know, is there some inequity here? And then what then do we do about Inkster Maintenance?
Well,
So, Mr. Borowski, are you asking if all the premises are assessed, period, or assessed?
I'm asking, are all the premises there assessed for business assessment? Consequently, there is no equity issue, or are some of them not? It sort of raises the question of equity.
well, our blended rate for realty was $6.67. And based on economies of scale, there's going to be some higher rents and some lower rents. So the premise that had the highest rent had the highest square footage had the lowest rent. And then subsequently, the leasable area, which was the highest, had the highest rent. But overall, our rent was $6.67.
I'll leave it there. Maybe Mr. Slaughter can illuminate things further.
Well, think so.
Okay, just give us a moment to get to your brief then, please, Mr. Slaughter.
Certainly.
Are you good, Mr. Assessor?
Not yet. Just bear with me. I gotta get to my email for the PDF. Thanks for giving me the time. This is.
While the assessor's doing that, I note it says YRC Worldwide Inc. on your brief, Mr. Slaughter. Is that a new player in the game, or?
Well, that's the client who has engaged us, which is the client that has all of the occupied space, which is part of the whole puzzle I'm trying to piece together here as well. So that's Reimer.
I'm good now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, when you're ready, Mr. Slaughter, we'll hear from you then, please.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, I think the best thing to do, because I'm also at a loss. I didn't represent this property for the realty assessment, but I've included the brief, which hopefully we can piece together part of the story. I will preface that by saying that my position in the end, as Mr. Froelich had said, for whatever reason, this is separately assessed. So the question is, what is the fair market rent for that premise, which again is a 35,000 square foot truck service garage built in 1964, I believe. So I'm going to go through the initial realty assessment brief, which may answer some of the questions we have about the ownership structures here. And then I'll turn my focus to simply a market rent discussion, because I think we may get lost in the weeds a bit as we go through part 1. At least I am. So My understanding, and if I could ask you to turn to page 13 of my submission, this is actually part of the realty assessment submission that was done by our office on behalf of the tenant as the sole taxpayer for the realty assessment of 1400 Inkster.
That's the one that's headed as property description. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. So this is the property description for the entire realty assessment roll, which is it constitutes 129,000 square feet of improvements. One building of which is our subject premise for today. Okay, so the entire area contemplated in the realty assessment building area is 130,000 thereabouts, and of that we have a portion. So if you look on page 13, you'll see the overhead map, and Mr. Froelich had gone through this. You'll see the area, the land area that the realty assessment includes. And from Mr. Froelich's submission, we understand that the subject premise is along the east side of this property. It's called 100 Milner for business assessment purposes. If we read through the property description, we have various buildings that are contemplated, built in the 60s. And you'll see in the middle, it says the last two buildings are a 35,883 square foot service garage constructed in 1964. That's the subject premise. 35,883 square feet, which is inclusive of a 4,061 square foot mezzanine. It's a truck garage. So what we have here is a description of the overall property that was contemplated for the realty assessment, of which the subject premise is part. Now, if we go further into the brief to page 18, I'll read what the representative on behalf of the realty assessment had stated. They stated that the market rent applied by the city for the entire realty assessment, 130,000 square feet, was $6.67 a square foot. And the argument was that that was excessive to what the actual arm's length rent paid was by Reimer. So the statement is, the subject property was leased as of April 1, 2018, and we have confirmed with both the landlord and the tenant that the lease is between arm's length unrelated parties. That's not my words. That's the words of the person who presented this evidence under oath. And that lease was for 129,979 square feet, inclusive of the subject premise. The rent equated to $6.53 a square foot. Now, if I may pause for a moment. If I can ask you to turn to page 9, please, of our submission. This is the board's determination of the realty assessment based on this evidence I described. On page 9, you'll see the board order. Page 10 is their rationale, and they reduce the assessment and they state it is based on the applicant's net operating income. What we know then is that Reimer Express leases the entire 129,000 feet, of which this one building is part. I don't know why the owner name is cited as being Inkster Maintenance. If that's, I don't know what the relationship is, but we do know that that's part of a lease by Reimer Express from an arm's length owner. That lease equates to $6.53 a square foot. In my mind, that should be applied to the entire premise. I mean, if you took any premise and divided it into separate categories, for whatever the reason is, if it's subleased or there's a separate licensed business operating or whatever the case may be, you would carve up something that started with a applied and appropriate rent and end up with higher per square foot rents for the entire thing. The sum wouldn't equal or the sum of the parts wouldn't equal the final rent. And I don't know if that's appropriate. But for whatever reason, it is assessed separately. So I pause there. That is part one of trying to figure out what is the rent on the subject premise. And from what I see here, it is $6.53 a square foot. The entire, which includes the subject. Step two is that an appropriate market rent? And that's really the question that we're to answer today. If it's separately assessed as 35,000 feet, okay, let's, the rest is interesting. The rest explains what the board had applied for the realty assessment, which I usually like to think is a good starting point for the business assessment. But is it appropriate? So if I could ask you to turn now to our actual submission on the business assessment, and just move ahead, please, to page 4. We talk about why we've applied $653 a square foot. The obvious first answer is, well, that's the rent that was applied for the realty assessment. But as a test to that, does it make sense for a 35,000 square foot service garage built in 1964? On page 5, we have 4 comparisons of similar size. Well, some smaller, some larger, but they provide a range that in this case averages $591 a square foot. Some are higher, some are lower. And the concern is that when we look at certain comparisons, you can have a wide range of factors which are going to influence the rent for any given premise. And you know, and in the end, it's very difficult to pinpoint ones that are exact. But let's keep in mind that this is a 1964 vintage service garage, and in my experience, $650 seems like a fairly appropriate rent to pay, and it's corroborated at least on aggregate form by the comparisons that we show. Now, the assessor has gone through the same exercise. You'll recall we talked about their comparisons as well, and I mentioned that their range was from $550 to $850 a square foot. And I mentioned that the higher comparisons that the city showed were the first 3. And I mentioned that from my experience, the first 3 were newer properties. I know that Bannister is the first comparison with the highest rent. It's a 2000s vintage, very high degree of, a very high quality warehouse manufacturing. And 78 Bannister is a similar, it's about 1990 vintage. I'm not sure about 2240 Logan. My concern, though, is that the inclusion of those newer premises take the average that the city says and pushes it up to corroborate their market rent. And I suggest that comparisons 4, 5, 6, and 7 from the city actually are good, better comparisons, which are aged Inkster Park industrial properties. And they also corroborate what we're suggesting, that a lower market rent, slightly lower market rent, is appropriate. So in the end, Mr. Chairman, it's a long-winded way of saying, for these 2 reasons, we feel that the market rent applied by the city is slightly excessive. We ask that 653 be applied because it is the rent that was applied for the realty assessment. But secondly, because it is a more appropriate rent based on the evidence before us for this type of premise. If we accept the 653 a square foot, you'll see on page 6, the only other portion to add to determine the annual rental value is the utilities, which we have no contention with. So we take the 653 a square foot applied to the entire area, which includes, again, a mezzanine, 4,000 square feet of mezzanine. Mezzanine often isn't even valued in the market. Many of the market rent comparisons that you'll see in evidence may have mezzanine that aren't even included in the leasable area quoted. That's typical market behavior. But in fact, we're adding that in and applying the same rent to it. Adding the utilities, we come to a revised annual rental value of $310,020, a slight reduction from the current annual rental value of $326,180. I think that concludes our presentation, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Froelich, questions for the applicant?
So you don't know who RPW is in terms of ownership group?
No, I don't know exactly who these parties are, except that the consultant under oath from our office had made a specific point of pointing out to the board that they had confirmed with both parties that this is an arm's length, unrelated transaction, unrelated party transaction.
And your rent at 1322 Waverly, was that a shell rent?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. And when I'm looking at your comparables at, so if you take your 2 lower rents, I'm just questioning number 6 Otter, that 32 land to building ratio. That seems a bit excessive, does it not?
Yeah, that could be a land to building ratio for an entire property, and 6 Otter perhaps is just one portion that's leased. I don't know, actually, Mr. Chairman.
No other questions.
Thank you. Mr. Borowski, questions for the applicant?
I have no questions.
You, Ms. Nesbitt?
I have no questions.
I guess my only question, actually just for clarification. You're saying the $6.53 overall for the subject property you think is fair, but not strictly because it's the rent for the entire property, but also because of the comparables.
That's correct. And that includes both the cities and ours. Again, many comparisons are going to be different. We have to take that into account. But I think actually the city provides 4 very good comparisons, which are more in line with the age and size and location. Combining that with our evidence, I think 667 seems excessive and 653 seems more appropriate. The reason why it's such an exact number, again, Mr. Chairman, is the second reason we applied it, and that is that it was the rent used for the realty assessment.
All right, thank you. Summation?
No, I'm good.
Summation, Mr. Slaughter? No?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Are you okay? Or do you need to?
Maybe just a minute.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we're gonna.
Yes, very well.
Okay. Good. Then I will call the hearing back to order. And the next property we will deal with is 250 Oak Point. That'd be file number 5606, I believe. So when you're ready, Mr. Assessor.
Yep. Business assessment ID is 23739. Owners Paul's Hauling. We have a total ARV of 365,820, utilizing 36,554 square feet, and the overall rental rate per is $10.01. As we are confused with the Reimer property, this 250 Oak Point property is also confusing as well. So when we look at this, and so what we have here is we have 3 premises. One is the first one's 13,360. Then we have another one. The third one is 2355. That will be the upper floor and the second floor for the office. And then for the truck warehouse portion, it would be 20,569. So when we're looking at the rents, we have 1049, 462, and 861. And then as you're looking through this here, we got the occupancy costs. What they go up to is so roughly, I don't have a total here, but if I'm just eyeballing it, 43 is 73, and 5 is 78 to come up with a total ARV of 335,940. What's interesting here is with this property, as I was curious about this, right? Because looking at for the Oak Point service from the realty perspective, we have one that's listed as Oak Point service, and then there you got 2 other ones as Paul's Hauling. So I found that to be interesting. Coming back to my PDF. So what I've done here is I provided some office rents in the northwest quadrant on Dublin and Border. So I'm showing a range here from 425 to 1250. And so I got one on Dublin, one on Border, one on St. James. And then on the next page, what I've done is, let me go counterclockwise. And then I got some other TRW warehouses on the next page, which work out, and I'm showing rents there on Oak Point, ranging from 625 to let me just increase it, 868, 689, 1068, 522, and $6 ranges. What I have here, so on the picture that I have for 250 Oak Point Highway, that's showing the office portion of it and where it's located at. So the 250 is where the red dot is on the bottom. And then subsequently, the other aspects of the BA are separated on here. I don't have an answer why there's two different BA numbers for this property. And then income expense mailer showing that this property is owner occupied. And that concludes my formal presentation.
Thank you. Can you tell us what a TRW is?
Well, it's a trucking warehouse. TRW, it's a it's transportation retail warehouse. TRW. I know truck warehouse. I don't know what the R is.
Thank you. Mr. Slaughter, questions for the assessor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Froelich, on your submission, the first page in the center, you have the 3 premise IDs, and just want to walk through those and make sure I understand what each of these 3 areas are. 13,630 square feet, in my understanding, is the main floor of the front office building.
That is correct.
The 20,569 is a separate building. It's at the back of the site, and it's the truck wash. Is that correct?
Okay. Yeah, it's a lower rent, so it's not office, and the last one is the second floor space.
Right, second floor of the office. Okay, and so when we, on the far right, when we add the annual rental values of the 3 portions, your total is $335,940 as the annual rental value, correct?
Did you have a question, Mr. Slaughter?
Oh, sorry, did I cut out there? Sorry, I just wanted to confirm, or maybe I didn't hear your answer, Mr. Froelich. The far right, the 3 annual rental values for those 3 portions, they total $335,940.
That is correct.
Okay. The assessment though is $365,820.
Yes.
Would you be in agreement with utilizing the city's own rationale and applying $335,940 as the assessment? That might save us some time, because I would agree to that, and then hopefully the owner agrees.
Which one's that? That's what are you looking for in terms of value?
Well, you have a discrepancy between what your ARV is of $335,940 and what the actual assessment is at $365,820.
I'm just curious about that.
And what I was aiming for is $324. So I mean, it's if we follow what the city actually did and assume that maybe there's just an error on the assessment, I think we might have
yeah, if you're good with $335,940, then I can accept that as well.
Is that a recommendation you're making, then, Mr.?
Let me just do let me just do the bottom line here. Yeah, I can live with that.
okay. So just to be clear, Mr. Chairman, I was aiming for an annual rent value of $324,000, but the explanation of that probably would take longer than even the last one, because this is such a mess. It's so close. I'm sure the owner would be happy if we agreed to the $335,940. So I would accept that. Thank you.
Okay, so you have no further questions for the assessor?
No, thank you.
Mr. Borowski, did you have any questions for the assessor?
Good heavens, no.
No. So, Mr. Slaughter, it's your presentation that although you were looking for a lower annual rental value, you are satisfied with the $335,940 as proposed by the assessor.
That's correct. Thank you.
Correct. Thank you. So nothing further to present then? I'm assuming there's no need for summation.
No.
Thank you. Bring us to the last property on our docket, which is 405 Logan. And file number is 5193 on that. Mr. Assessor, would you give us your evidence on that, please?
Address is 405 Logan Avenue, business ID number is 38954. We have a total rental value of $341,820, utilizing 45,800. We have an overall ARV of $7.46. The base rate that we're using is $5.01. We have heat, electric, fuel, and water, and air conditioning, with total occupancy costs coming at $112,259 to come up with a rounded value of $341,820. It's an order. We have conflicting information on the mailer with regards to the net rent. The net rent reported is $4.85, and we're asking for the assessment to be confirmed. And what I have here on the second page is just an overall, some pictures of the subject property, just an overhead view. It's a brand new building, or relatively brand new. Just go over here, and then you can see the next pages. Let me rotate view counterclockwise. You can actually see the newness of the building and the location. And here are my comparable rents that I have shown in the area. And let's be here for 1 sec. And that concludes my formal presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Slaughter, questions for the assessment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How do I express this? Mr. Furlik, is the discussion we had earlier today, is that still something that we can entertain at this hearing?
Because what I was told that you're asking for, I didn't think we were still good with the municipal board value.
Oh, yeah, I recommend that to the owner. I haven't heard back, but yeah, I would.
Sorry about that. It's just that I wasn't too sure, because when I came here and then circumstances, I'd like to make a recommendation of $334,500. Sorry,
Could you repeat that?
Yep, 334,500.
Can you tell us what that's based on, please, Mr. Assessor?
What we did is we matched the rent that was reported on the income and expense mailer.
So that's based on the actual rent?
Well, there's conflicting information on the income and expense mailer, but we believe that this rent's fair.
Mr. Slaughter, did you have any questions in relation to that?
No questions. Just one small thing, Mr. Furlik. It isn't actually a brand new building. It's half and half, 1964 and 99.
Yeah, but it looks like almost like a brand new building, though, right? From the facade of it, right? I've never inspected it, but it looks okay on the outside.
Yeah, well, I guess a moot point if we come to an agreement, but anyway, I just wanted to point that out for the board's reference. But we would agree, Mr. Chairman, with the recommendation of $334,500. It's part of a negotiation that Mr. Furlik and I were discussing for both the realty and the business assessment, and I would recommend both to the owner. So I assume that we should have a settlement on both.
Thank you. Mr. Borowski, did you have any questions for the assessor?
None.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
None.
I have no questions. So, Mr. Slaughter, nothing further to present. It's your position that the $334,500 is a fair and equitable value?
That's correct. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any desire for summation on all the properties today?
No, we are mindful of parking issues.
All right. With that, I thank you both for your presentations today, and I will call the hearing to a close. The orders are forthcoming. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks very much.